All right, world history, and we are talking about responses to the Industrial Revolution today. And we're going to be looking, you were supposed to read this yesterday, and we're going to roll with it today, starting on page 405, and just kind of go through a couple of things and maybe help you understand it a little bit better, maybe internalize it a little bit better, and grasp it a little bit better. Um, I want to start with an example of what was going on during the Industrial Revolution, and that would be the chimney sweep. Now, I don't know how many of you have chimneys. I do not on this house. We have a fake fireplace, but I remember growing up, we had a wood burning fireplace, had a chimney on it, and you had to clean that sucker out once in a while. Make sure that now we would usually buy these logs that supposedly cleaned it, and you would burn them and it would take the soot off. But you can imagine if you had a coal burning fireplace or a wood burning fireplace, they build up the creosote or whatever it is, they build up all this soot and nastiness in there. And if you don't clean it out once in a while, it will catch on fire eventually. And I've watched these old where they redo houses and this type of thing, and flipping houses and all of that. And one of the things they do, if they're going to keep a wood fireplace, they have to make sure that all that junk is cleaned out. Sometimes birds will build nests in there, everything. And you've got to go in and clean them out. Factories had fireplaces as well. And one thing they would do, since these fireplaces or these chimneys were narrow and small, they would send kids down. And a lot of kids were injured. A lot of kids were killed by going down in these chimneys. You can imagine it's dangerous. You had crumbling brick in them a lot of times. They were narrow. Sometimes ropes would break. All kinds of stuff was happening. And so in order to fix a problem like that, sometimes it does take government intervention. Y'all know me, I'm not big on government intrusion, government intervention, but sometimes it takes it. And in 1834, Parliament in Britain said, hey, kids under 10, you can't go down chimneys anymore. 10 seemed to be the cutoff age. That just seems to be the norm. But one of the responses, and you read about this, was social reform. And there were several laws passed, like the Factory Act. It limited child labor, the Poor Law. It put government in charge of relief. Now, I want to stop there for just 1 second. Relief means, in other words, you can't afford to eat, the government would take care of you. And I've mentioned this time and time again to several classes, not sure how many times I've mentioned it in yours, but up until this time, it was the people's duty to take care. Your neighbor. If I have a neighbor down the street that doesn't have something to eat for supper, and I find out about it, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to carry them something to eat. It may not be a steak and a baked potato, but it'll be something that they can eat. And the church was responsible for taking care of relief. And England puts the government in charge with the Poor Law. And they were very nice with the way they worded it. Hey, you're poor. Let's call it the Poor Law. But anyway, the Poor Law put the government in charge of relief. The Mines Act. The Mines Act. They were putting women and kids under the age of 10 in these mines. Tight spaces, kind of like the chimney sweeps. And so the Mines Act said no women can be in the mines, and men or boys under the age of 10, once again, 10 being the cutoff, could not work in the mines. Then, in 1847, they passed the 10-hour bill. The 10-hour bill limited the workday for women and children to 10 hours a day. Now, when you think about that, men could work longer, but think of our workday now, typically an 8-hour day. You're at work maybe 8.5, 9 hours, but part of that is a lunch break or a meal break or breaks. Little different system back then, but they limited it to 10 hours. There was also an anti-slavery movement led by William Wilberforce. Okay, love that name. Also, Parliament repealed the Corn Laws. It placed a high tariff on imported grains. You saw all of those. One thing that happened was that more common people got the right to vote. Chartism. Your book talks about Chartism. Chartism, before Chartism, the Parliament was controlled by the big landowners. And what they had to do, they had to get the House of Lords to finally back away from protesting this. But the laws were so dated, and the districts had been drawn a certain way for many, many years, and they had to change that. And therefore, you could be a small landowner and get to vote. Before, you had to be like a land baron pretty much to get to vote and get to be in office. So they worked on that with Chartism. And you saw that in your book. They also passed bills pertaining to public health. There were several things: cholera outbreaks, there was dysentery, there was all kinds of stuff. The sewage system in London ran right by where they got their water, and they would pump their water at these pumping stations. There was a case in the 1800s where one of the sewage lines leaked, and it was getting into the water system, and people would drink it, and they would get cholera, and they would die because you're drinking sewage, basically, infested water. There were a lot of bills that said, hey, we need to work on public health and clean it up. So that was one of the big things that happened during this era. There were some good things. The Parliament Bill of 1911, it said the House of Lords could only temporarily delay legislation passed by the House of Commons, not veto it as before. So in other words, the House of Lords, the rich folks of England, could basically just, we're done with it. Whereas in the United States, we know that the Senate and the House, I mean, you can't just do away with it. You have to work on the bill and vote to pass it. And anyway, so they were trying to work out some of the governmental issues during the Industrial Revolution. But with progress, and we talked about yesterday, the price of goods dropped and things were more readily available, those type of things. But one thing that happened during this movement is people think they've got all their stuff together. They've got their act together. And so let's work on fine-tuning society. One of the things that happened then is you had a guy named Robert Owen. He thought, hey, I'll build a community for my workers. It'll be a utopia. It'll be wonderful. It'll be perfect. It'll be like a big hippie commune. And it was an agriculture community. He formed one in New Harmony, Indiana. He also formed one around a textile mill in Scotland, and it failed after a short time. You've got to remember, we've talked about this before, pretty certain. The Pilgrims, when they came to this country, they had a commune. They had a storehouse, and people put food in, and everybody ate. And if you remember, people started going hungry, and finally their governor said, hey, if you don't work, you don't eat. And they gave every family a parcel of land, and they said, farm it. And as a result, people had plenty to eat. And if you didn't farm it, or you didn't trade for food, have some other good that would be valuable to someone who had farmed, and they traded you food for it, say a fur or whatever, gold, then you went hungry. And the production of food skyrocketed, and the colony succeeded as a result. Communism does not work. But one person that thought it did, Karl Marx, he gets together with a guy named Friedrich Engels, and they write the Communist Manifesto. They thought that workers should unite in opposition against the rulers, the ruling class. They thought there should be a society with no classes. They thought that everyone should share and share alike, and everyone have everything in common. Communism. Does communism work? You know the answer to that. No, it doesn't. There's not one case in the world that communism has succeeded. The only way communist nations succeed is if they venture into capitalism, and still the people are poor. It's just some people have wealth. The higher ups have wealth. There's no such thing as a classless society. You work for what you get, you succeed, and please keep that in mind. They labeled different classes. The proletariat were the workers, the bourgeoisie were the middle class property owners, and Marx said that there should be a revolution. And you had to have revolution. He also downed religion, and we're going to talk about that. He called religion the opiate of the people. He said it was a drug used by the ruling class to keep the poorer folks down. He's an idiot. But anyway, moving right along. During the Industrial Revolution, you've got to understand, and you read about this yesterday, that people started doubting religion. People started doubting the truth of God's Word. And I want to make sure, please read, because he's one of my favorite people ever in history, is Spurgeon. And I want you to read about Spurgeon. It is on page 411. Charles Spurgeon. And he was just a great guy. And I want you to read about that. Please make sure, if you don't read anything else, read The Spiritual Impact on the Industrial Age. And it shows that a life yielded to Christ will do a lot of great things in the world. So Charles Spurgeon definitely proved that. But he stuck to God's Word. And people would criticize and say that God's Word was not true. And Spurgeon set out to show them that was not the case. You see other names, Robert Raikes and George Williams. He established the YMCA. He established that. So pretty cool stuff there. The Young Men's Christian Association. That's what that stands for. Robert Raikes started Sunday schools. William Booth, he founded the Salvation Army, which you know is still around. And Dwight L. Moody and Ira Sanka, two of the great evangelists of all time. So you read about them, and hopefully you got a lot of information on them. Listen, in every society, the church is held strong. Make sure that our generation, your generation, my generation, doesn't fumble the ball. Because now more than ever, we think it's bad during the Industrial Revolution when this idea of French Enlightenment takes over, and we think that, hey, if we just work hard, we'll be good. This whole idea of French Enlightenment. People stood up and they said, no, we're going to stand strong. We're going to stand strong on our faith. We're going to stand solid on God's Word. And we think it was bad then. Think about how it is now. People make fun of Christians. People make fun of the Bible. People question the Bible. People say it's not true. They say it's fiction, make-believe, all of this stuff. Listen, stand firm in your faith. Let's be a generation that proves that, hey, the church is strong. The church is stronger than ever. And listen, I would encourage you too, through your church somehow, some way, even though government has taken over a lot of the relief in the world, make sure your church, make sure your family is reaching out to others in need and helping meet those needs. On page 413, you see 4 questions. List 2 of the 6 goals of the Chartist movement. Number 2, name the 2 dominant prime ministers of Britain during the latter part of the 19th century and give the political party of each. 3, define a welfare state. And 4, what force did Karl Marx believe determined the course of history, and in what famous work did he explain his socialist ideas? They're all in the chapter. Make sure you know those answers, and that will fill in the remainder of the blanks. That's 413 section quiz. Do that and submit it, and you are done for the day. Have a great one.